Hey, Wanderers. So we're digging in this week on this question about who does God say that I am or who you are. And I've asked you to kind of ponder and pray in that first day of seeking this question about questions like who in your life gave you positive affirmations and spoke life into you, and who in your life maybe gave word curses and spoke death into you. And I know for many of you, including myself, this is a very triggering subject. Um, so I wanted to share a little bit about why I wanted to have you ask this question. Back in August, when I was getting serious about my quiet time, I was listening to a series done at my church called Hero Maker. And it was talking about how every hero, every superhero that we see, there's someone in the story who's the hero maker. So take, for example, Batman. The hero maker in the story of Batman, or Bruce Wayne, is Alfred. Alfred is the one who stays behind. He's constant. He's stable. He's the one that Bruce can come home to, or Batman can come home to, bloodied and beaten up and discouraged by the world that he's going out to fight. And he knows that when he comes home to Alfred, that Alfred knows who he is, his true identity, and that Alfred will feed him and clothe him and take care of him and bandage his wounds and tell him and remind him of who he is and why he does what he does, and then turn around and send him back out into the world. I was thinking about this in relationship to my children, and when I was sending them to public school. My two little ones started kindergarten this year, and of course, as a mom, the fear that goes into sending them into public school is thoughts of bullying and their safety, their mental safety, their physical safety, things like that. So I decided at the beginning of the school year that I was going to speak life into my kids. So every morning when I drop them off, we have a mission for the day, and I tell them something about themselves or some trait that I want them to work hard on practicing for the day. For example, Isaac, you're a truth teller. So I want you to make sure today when you're going into the school that you are being very careful and making sure you always tell the truth. Ellie, you're a helper, or you're responsible. As you're going through your day, I want you to be a helper and look for opportunities to be a helper and use your helpfulness with the other kids or teachers in your class. And it's worked great. We still do it. They ask me for a mission if I forget to give them one, and I love that. But where this gets deeply personal for me is, as I was thinking about this series, I wished for a second that I had had the opportunity in my childhood for someone to speak life into me like that. I didn't have a perfect childhood, but I didn't have the worst by any means. However, growing up, I felt stupid, and I felt like I didn't really have anything spectacular to offer the world. My dad and mom divorced when I was 3. My stepdad was abusive. So growing up, I felt like I had to mind my P's and Q's and fit into a certain box in order to keep people and in order to be left alone and not picked on. So when I was thinking about how I wanted to tell my kids who they were so that the world didn't tell them who they were, they didn't have to rely on the world to tell them, I started wishing that my dad, even though he is a good dad, he just wasn't present when I was a kid. I wish that he had had that same message given to him so that he could have told me how he saw me, because my relationship with him has been tumultuous, but it's healed a lot now. But I wish that he had been there. And my mom did a good job of affirming me, but there's something about a father's words. And then it dawned on me that my dad is still living, and he's healthy, and our relationship is in a good place. And so I called him and explained this to him, and I told him I wanted to run an experiment, sort of a social experiment on myself. And I asked him to, when he thought of me, to pray over how he saw me, and to send me words for how he saw me. And I had no idea how healing it would be for our relationship just to have that conversation. But shortly after my request, within a few weeks, my dad sent me a message, and then he sent me another message. And he said words to me that I never ever expected my dad to use when describing me. And those words stick with me now. As an example, one of them was courageous. My dad's a 30 plus year veteran. He was in the Air Force for over 30 years. My sister and my brother both went into the military, and I didn't. I never thought my dad would describe me as courageous because I'm the only kid that didn't go into the military. Anyway, I found that hearing my dad's words in my head, erasing some of those thoughts that I had about myself, created this voice in my head that I would now go into situations that are scary to me, and I think to myself, I can do this because my dad said that I'm courageous. I was well into my adult years before someone very wise pointed out to me that my faith and understanding of who God was and how God saw me was a reflection of how I felt like my dad and my stepdad saw me and who they were to me. So growing up with an abusive stepdad or a absent father, I had sort of transplanted those features onto my imagery of God. And in a lot of ways, those people stood in the way of me seeing God for who he was and really seeing how much he loved me. So into my adult years, when someone pointed that out to me, it finally became clear to me that maybe God, in this image that I naturally had of who he was a reflection of my earthly father and not really a reflection of who he said he was and who he was for me. So this week, as we're digging in, I just want to, again, encourage you to focus on maybe tearing down some of those word curses or those thoughts that you've had about yourself or that you've been told, and maybe amplifying those positive affirmations that you've gotten from the people in your life who are really strong pillars and are your hero makers, like Alfred was for Batman. There's more on this. There's a lot more to say on this. And it's not something that I take lightly that you're walking with me through asking these questions, because I know this is intensely personal. But I'm going to put some scriptures up for us today to discover a little bit more about this. My favorite is in Genesis, and it's really short, but it's this idea of Jacob and Rachel. They had a baby named Benjamin, and the backstory there, if you don't know, is that Jacob loved Rachel, loved her dearly, and he kind of got tricked into marrying her older sister. So he married the older sister, and then he went back to work so that he could acquire, unfortunately, the rights to marry Rachel. And he and the older sister, long story short, had lots of kids, but it was the kids that he had with Rachel that he loved most, and he was very open about this, one of which was Joseph, if you know the story of Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat. But there was a second little boy that they had together named Benjamin. And when Rachel had him, Rachel actually died in childbirth with Benjamin. And again, Jacob loved her, and he loved these two boys especially that came from his bond with her. And when she died, she actually named Benjamin Benoni, which I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, which meant child of my suffering. So she gave him this name out of the pain and anguish that came from this childbirth that she actually ended up dying from. And when Jacob heard that and he saw that, he instantly renamed Benjamin. And Benjamin means right hand or favorite son. And I love this because even though Jacob desperately loved Rachel, he knew the power of a name. He knew the power of speaking words over a child's life that says, you're a child of suffering, or you're my favorite son. And I feel like this is such a beautiful example and symbolism of what God does in our lives. We might feel like a child of suffering, but in reality, God calls us his favorite. He renames us. We see many times in the Bible and scriptures where God renamed people. So I want you to mull over that and keep digging, and we will check in more tomorrow as we actually start to try and interpret some of what God says about us as a group of believers, but also what he says about us individually. So keep wandering, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.